Sure, we like the Chiefs, the Bengals, and the Rams offenses, but who's the new hotness? We're going to dive into new offenses we want to hitch our wagons to in 2025. Let's get it. What's up, fantasy people? Welcome back to the True North Fantasy Football Pod. We are back to inform, empower, and entertain you towards making sound fantasy decisions. I am Trav. As usual, I am hosting and West Coasting. And of course, on the other side of Canada, looking fresh after a mint haircut, we have the Italian stallion, Frank Amaranti. How you doing today, my man? Happy episode 2 of the relaunch.
Oh, feeling great, feeling fresh, like you said, ready to talk about some undervalued offenses, some newfound offenses we should be intrigued by in fantasy football. It's going to be exciting. We're not going to stick with the regulars like you said, Chiefs, Bengals, and the like, but you got some that you like the improvements they made this offseason. I got some that are values in fantasy drafts. So let's get into it.
Yeah, and I think this is going to be a really good episode, Frank, not just for season-long drafters, good for dynasty folks as well. If you're wanting to kind of find offenses that you can attach to where other people might not in your leagues, great for best ball too. Stacking opportunities aplenty in some of these teams that we're going to talk about, and maybe not the most expensive stacking options, Frank. So this is all gettable stuff for fantasy nerds, and we like that. Of course, subscribe to us on YouTube, True North Fantasy. Make sure you leave a comment and press that like button if you like what we're doing, and find our social media information in the episode description there and give us a follow. We would really appreciate that. But yeah, Frank, newfound offenses, some teams. I think we got some pretty good teams on the docket here, so I'm excited to get into it. Some teams that might still have a little bit of stink surrounding them as far as perception goes, but some teams that we think that you can get a bit of an edge on. So why don't you kick us off on this one, Frank?
Yeah, so I'm going with the Carolina Panthers, and it's just because primarily due to the fact that Bryce Young showed major strides in the second half last year. From week 12 onward, Young averaged 21.2 fantasy points per game, ranking as QB8 during that stretch. This included a spike week of over 36 points. Young had 5 rushing touchdowns, showed improvements as a passer, really proved that Young could make an impact on the ground. He could be a 300 plus rushing yard quarterback. And now with the Panthers bringing in Tet McMillan, who's a legit wide receiver one, drawing comparisons to Drake London and Mike Evans, that contested catch specialist. He can be a big target, possession threat, win downfield. That will really help the offense. And Bryce Young in underdog leagues is going as QB 24. Tent McMillan is around wide receiver 22, which I think is a good value because the runway is clear for heavy volume for McMillan. McMillan goes right next to Travis Hunter, who has to compete for targets with Brian Thomas Jr., whereas, McMillan is dealing with Xavier Legette and Adam Thielen and Jalen Coker. So I love McMillan as a top rookie wideout. And just having that top target is going to really pay major dividends for all the skills players. The offense should really improve and build off what the Panthers did last year. Chuba Hubbard finished as RB12 in points per game last year in half PPR. Now he's going around RB16 behind rookies like RJ Harvey. We spoke highly of Harvey. We love Harvey's landing spot with the Broncos, but the steam's gotten too far and gotten Harvey ahead of, proven producers like Chuba Hubbard, who still has the same coaching staff that trusted Hubbard in a workhorse role. So even though the Panthers brought in Rico Dowdle, there's no reason to think Hubbard can't continue being that workhorse. In terms of the other targets on the Panthers, Xavier Legette, Adam Thielen, Jalen Coker, more just best ball type of picks if you're building a Panthers stack. But overall with this offense, I love the direction they're heading. I think they can be much better this year, the Panthers overall, and win, a few more games. Maybe not make the playoffs, but hey, the NFL is crazy. You could definitely see it. I mean, look what Sam Darnold just took the Vikings to the 1 seed. So you can't rule that out, especially the Panthers upgraded their offensive line. They brought in Robert Hunt from the Dolphins and Austin Corbett, the center. So these are all strong moves to really build up this offense, and I think it's going to really improve this year to the point where they're great values. Bryce Young what I like in those late quarterbacks outside the top 20, you want to take someone who, especially in best ball, can finish in the top 12, and Young can do so with the running that he showed and with his strong second half. So I'm excited about the Panthers.
Yeah, yeah, same here. And I think, like last week, we talked about it. Obviously, we were talking about Tet, we talked about Chuba, we talked about Bryce a little bit, and then, this week you're bringing them up as a team to target, and I think that's such a good fit, Frank, because it all kind of stems for me from Dave Canales. Like he is a really good play caller. I believe in what he's doing, and we saw some of that come out last year. We saw him trust Chuba Hubbard as a bell cow. We saw him trust Bryce Young to go through some lumps and stay in there throughout the back half of the season. So yeah, and you mentioned the other targets too. Leggett does nothing for me. Jalen Coker does nothing. Adam Thielen, I think, is going to get some targets this year, but I think he's a perfect complement as opposed to somebody who is going to take away from one Tet McMillan. So, yeah, it's kind of what you said. We can see where this work is going to go, and we can see the path to success for these guys. So, good call on the Panthers. And that kind of brings me to mine here because mine is a selection. My first one, at least, is a selection based on predictability and kind of knowing where the volume is going to go. And that would be the Las Vegas Raiders. We're going to talk about obviously Ashton Genty. He was picked in the top five of the with the sixth pick of the NFL draft, but astronomical draft capital for a running back nonetheless. The offense is going to run through him. The offense is going to run through Brock Bowers, and we know that, right? So the beautiful thing about attaching to the Raiders is you don't have much ambiguity as far as these guys. There's not a wide receiver two that we really want. We want Jacoby Myers because he's going to get some targets alongside Brock Bowers, but it's going to be a fairly condensed offense to where Ashton Genty's getting targets and tons of rushing work. And then those two guys are going to get a bunch of targets. Of course, Peach Carroll stabilizes this organization that has been in the dumps for quite a while. Chip Kelly coming in as the OC. I think that the dysfunction factor between Pete Carroll and Chip Kelly could be there at times potentially, but I do believe that Chip Kelly can still run a competent offense. And from my recollection of his offenses from the Eagles, it's pretty low volume as far as passing, still enough volume to facilitate two guys in Bowers and Myers. So we're not going to be disappointed from a target standpoint in anybody. And then he likes to run the ball a ton. And then Ashton Genty is just to the moon. So Ashton Genty is the running back 3 for me in 2025 already. Very bullish there. I think Jacoby Myers, as he kind of always is going to be a fantastic value. And then Brock Bowers is, of course, the prince who was promised at tight end, one of the top 2 tight ends alongside Trey McBride. So while it's not like a plethora of options, like I'm going to mention in a team that I talk about later, it's one where we know where it's going to go. We know that Geno Smith is a guy that is going to distribute and make it happen for those guys. So I just think the avenue is there. The solidification of some key positions like head coach and quarterback are there, and running back as well with Ashton Genty. And it's not going to be like a world beating offense by any means, but it's going to be kind of like what Geno did in Seattle with better playmakers, right? He's going to be able to distribute and make it serviceable. And then those guys are going to have to do some work with the ball in their hands. And I think they can absolutely do that. So what's your take on the Raiders offense though? Do you think some of that dysfunction might come into play, Frank, or do you think it's wheels up?
I like what the Raiders did, bringing stability with Geno Smith, Pete Carroll. This is a team, this is an organization that's been starving for a winning season. I mean, you don't want to be the Steelers, like a treadmill team that just squeaks in and loses in round one every year. But it's nice to make the playoffs, every once in a while. It doesn't always have to be just Super Bowl or bust. And the Raiders did good moves. Geno Smith's an underrated quarterback. I think the offense could be good. Chip Kelly uh, likes to play fast tempo, if I remember correctly. So that's
Yeah.
always good for fantasy. More volume, more plays. Like you said, the target share is condensed. Brock Bowers, Jacoby Myers. I think this could be a decent team. And then, you can take a shot on what's that rookie's name? The receiver on the Raiders.
Is it
Oh,
Dante
Jack.
Thornton?
No,
Oh,
Jack.
Jack Besh, right? I'm
Jack.
remiss in not mentioning him.
So
That's right.
these are the type of rookies I like to target more often just because they go so late. Like Jack Besh goes wide receiver 60. You could make a
Yeah.
dart throw on him. Maybe he can earn some work. I like the Raiders offense. Like you said, Ashton Genty wheels up. He's definitely a top 10 fantasy football pick in redraft leagues, if not higher. Brock Bowers, I will say, I love Brock Bowers. I love what he did. And at first, I was thinking, beginning of the second round for Bowers, but I'm starting to think maybe more mid to late second round. Like he had a great season, Bowers did, but still averaged 12.2 fantasy points per game in half PPR. That would have ranked among the running backs, that would have ranked like outside the top 15. So you're paying a premium if you want Bowers. Not to say he can improve, he can. He could have a much like a bigger season, but if he averages 15 points per game, is that enough to justify, the early second round pick? I don't know, because the opportunity cost there with taking Bowers is someone like, Christian McCaffrey goes 12 or 13, so that's my only
Mhm.
thing. But overall, with the Raiders offense, I do like it. I love what they've done. The takeaway here is I think the priority is obviously Genty, and maybe Bowers is just a bit overvalued.
Yeah, no, that's a fair point too. I think Bowers is being drafted at his ceiling, right? He's not going to return much on the investment that you put into him right now, but the return should be pretty good if you think about it among the tight end landscape, of course. But Frank, I want to talk about your next one because I think this one could be a little spicy, a little bit spicy. So why don't you tell me a little bit about the New Orleans Saints?
Yeah, so the angle I'm taking with going with the Saints as an offense I want to target is just value. Starting with wide receiver Chris Olave, you know, he dealt with concussions, which I know obviously is a huge risk, but at least it's not something that not like an ACL where he has to take time to, get totally back to himself, Olave. So that's one plus in Olave's return. You look at throughout his career, Olave's shown the ability to earn targets and win downfield. And we just wanted that coach who can utilize Olave more in the intermediate routes because he's capable of that. Well, now he has Kellen Moore there, and we saw what Kellen Moore did for CeeDee Lamb and did for Keenan Allen. He likes to put his top target in the slot sometimes. He did it a bit with Devonta Smith as well last year. So I think Olave could really be a nice value. He goes right now an underdog, wide receiver 34. That's behind, Jordan Addison, who's still a number two target, behind Calvin Ridley, who's in a questionable offense. I know Olave's in a questionable offense as well, but if you're saying player for player, Ridley versus Olave, a
Yeah,
lot of people
easy.
will be on Olave's side. So he if he could stay healthy, he could have a nice year. And then Rashid Shaheed was performing well before getting injured, and best ball type of player that could have those spike weeks. Alvin Kamara again, you know, he didn't really like he's not the explosive player he once was, but he's still an excellent receiver out of the backfield, and he goes outside of the top 20 running backs, so there's value there as well. And with Derek Carr retiring, Tyler Shuck, the path is cleared for him to start. And, Kellen Moore handpicked Shuck as his quarterback. So even though Spencer
True.
Rattler's there, that's from the previous coach. Shuck has one of the strongest arms in the draft. I know a lot, including myself, mocked the pick because it's a 26-year-old rookie,
Mhm.
but he has more experience. Maybe not in starts because I know Shuck had fewer starts than you would think from a 26-year-old rookie in college, but he's been around for a while, so he's seen a lot of different offenses,
Yeah.
experience with all of that. And having Kellen Moore as coach is helpful. It's a it's a good play caller. There's a reason why he was always a coveted offensive coordinator. you know, this offense could be sneaky. Like, think of it also the offensive line, they've used their first round pick on offensive tackles in back to back seasons. So you look at Shuck's weapons, Olave, Shaheed, they even brought in Brandon Cooks, who's well past his prime, but still another target who has a track record. Alvin Kamara in the backfield. If you're building a best ball team, it's a nice, easy stack to get to. You could get Shuck as your QB3. He goes outside of top 30 quarterbacks. Like, what if he's decent? He doesn't need to be this incredible rookie to give you profit at that price. And then you just pair him with Chris Olave, who I think, if he could stay healthy, could have the best year of his career. So, really, my whole intrigue and interest with the Saints is value. And if we're wrong? What if consensus is too low on Shuck and he's actually, pretty good? Like some respected draft minds said
Yeah.
if Shuck was younger, he would be going higher in the draft, maybe in the first round. So I know obviously it's a knock that Shuck is 26 because he's producing in college against players younger than him. But this is a guy with great size, 6'5", cannon of an arm. It's a thing where why not make the bet because it's so cheap? And if Shuck pays off, you can really reap the rewards on what could be an underrated Saints offense. So with the coaching upgrade and the offensive line upgrade in mind, I'm interested in this Saints offense.
Yeah, that's interesting. And Shuck, like I think long term, him being 26 right now is a knock on him. But I think short term, looking at him potentially getting starts in year one, I think him being 26 might make an NFL team more inclined to put him in there and trust him with an NFL offense. Obviously, Derek Carr just retired over the weekend, so that's the big news. And we know that he's not going to be in the picture, so it's going to be Radler versus Shuck, unless something else happens where they bring in some other veteran, which is on the table, to be honest with you. But who's that guy going to be? And I mean, Olave and Shuck as the wide receiver one and a quarterback one on an NFL team might be the cheapest stack of
Yeah,
both ones that you could get in the entire league. I like what they've done at the running back room too. Obviously, Alvin Kamara probably going to leave. Kendre Miller has had a little bit of steam, but I'm a big fan of Devin Neal, who just came in the draft, and I think he can be a top runner for an NFL team. And so I'm curious to see how that shakes out too, because Kellen Moore doesn't have a huge history of targets to the running backs, but he has a huge history of using his running backs a lot and feeding them through the run game. And so I think that's going to be pretty good for the running back that gets the meat of the carries. And obviously that looks like it's going to be Alvin Kamara off the hop, but who knows? So yeah, look for those handcuffs potentially late. And then, yeah, the ones on this team are just so cheap. To get the guy who is the starter in each position is just cheap. So take a shot, take a flyer. And like you said, Frank, it's not going to be world beating. Like it's just going to be serviceable. And that's okay. With Olave, honestly, being able to produce more than serviceable numbers on serviceable volume, if that makes sense. I think
yeah,
he could bring some upside there too. You can get over concussion issues. And if he
yeah,
has, then look out.
yeah. And also wanted to add, like, if you're doing a redraft takeaway for this, it's to really target Chris Olave because his draft cost is lower because of the question marks at quarterback. But there's a chance that Shuck, with his cannon of an arm, could be a good fit in a good scheme with Kellen Moore. Shuck is more of a pick for me if it's best ball as my QB3, or in Dynasty where you can get him third round in rookie drafts or getting a starting quarterback. In redraft, obviously, you're not going to really get Shuck and other than super flex leagues as like a backup. But I think the overall point is maybe Shuck could keep this offense afloat or even better and be somewhat competent, which would make Olave especially a major value.
Yeah, definitely cannot ignore it altogether. So I'm going to take us from the Bayou over to the Windy City in Chicago, Frank, because the Bears are probably my number one offense to attach to. It started obviously last year with the addition of Caleb Williams, Roma Dunze into an offense that had DJ Moore on it. They added DeAndre Swift. And so the pieces have started to come together, and we kind of wanted pieces last year, but this year is where it's really come together. And that is heavily tied to new head coach Ben Johnson, Frank. We've seen him do some amazing things with the offense over in Detroit, and we want him to do that with Caleb Williams and the Chicago offense. It's not just tied to Detroit, obviously, to Ben Johnson. It's Ben Johnson with all of these players. DJ Moore, Roma Dunze, DeAndre Swift. They just added Luther Burden. They just added Colston Loveland. They still have Cole Kmet. They added a ton to their offensive line, similar to what the Panthers did, but maybe a scale above what the Panthers did for the Bears. And I think that's kind of going to be the key to everything in keeping Caleb Williams afloat, because he's on the hot seat now. He has everything in place to succeed. And this is going to be a bit of a make or break season for him to show that he can be the guy that deserves to be picked at the quarterback one overall in the NFL draft, as he was. And, I don't think he's a bad quarterback necessarily. He got shit on after his rookie season, but I think like the Matt Eberflus and Shane Waldron experiment was bad from the start. I don't think those guys were positioned to succeed, and I don't think they necessarily positioned Caleb to succeed. I always kind of hate that defensive minded head coach combo too, Frank, where it's a defensive minded head coach and then the offensive coordinator, because if your offense does well, that offensive coordinator is going to get a job as a head coach somewhere. And then what you're doing is you're cycling through offensive coordinators and basically ruining a rookie's career throughout his rookie contract there. So I never liked that from the start. And I think this, with Ben Johnson as the offensive minded head coach who's in place and has the trust of the organization, is really where he can be set up to succeed. Last year, he was sacked the most of any quarterback in the league. Caleb Williams was. But through all of that, he only threw 6 interceptions. Obviously, the deep passing wasn't necessarily all that great, which I think he can improve on with some more time in the offense and a better play caller. But Yeah, I think Ben Johnson has a lot to work with in Caleb, and I think Caleb has a lot to work with in these guys. I didn't actually mention DeAndre Swift last week, Frank, because I wanted to talk about the Canadian running backs, but DeAndre Swift was probably one of the biggest NFL draft winners. The only guy that was added to the Bears was Kalel Mullings, and I'm not super worried about Kalel Mullings having an effect on DeAndre Swift's workload. It's going to be Swift with Roshan Johnson as the backup. We have heard some rumors of Nick Chubb maybe being there. I also heard over the weekend that the Bears have poked around on the availability of Kenneth Walker, which would be very interesting. I would be super invested into either of those guys going there. But I think we got to go with what we know right now. And DeAndre Swift is the running back 27 in underdog drafts, Frank, back of the 7th round. And if it's the starting running back on a Ben Johnson offense going that late in drafts, I am going to be investing heavily. So I like everything that's happening there. The pass catchers, bit more of a mess, obviously, with Luther Burden and Colston Loveland, but early minicamp usage for Luther Burden has shown that he's primarily working out of the slot. And I think that's kind of a good thing for us trying to be able to know what's going to happen here because he's probably not going to be making it on the field a ton early in the season in 2 wide receiver sets. He's going to need those 3 wide sets to get on the field with DJ Moore and Rome Odunze mostly manning those areas with 2 wide sets. So I think that we kind of know a little bit about. We obviously have to keep monitoring. Um, and then the tight ends. The tight ends is really interesting as well because how much does he want to run 2 tight end sets with Loveland and Komet when he has all of these really good options at wide receiver? So I took a little bit of a look, Frank, and this one's going to be a bit of a mouthful, so a bit of a TLDR maybe. But in Detroit, I was just looking at some of Ben Johnson's usage for these guys and maybe personnel groupings. Sorry. So as his run game got better, he used a lot less 3 wide sets. And I think it's important to note that his run game in Chicago is not going to be as good as it was in Detroit. But last year they were bottom 10 as the 24th most pass attempts with 3+ wide receivers on the field. Year before that, 19th. Year before that was 14th. And so from 2022, 76% of their pass attempts had 3+ wide receivers. Now in 2024, they only had 64%. 2 tight end sets went up, obviously, with the addition of Sam Laporta. 18%, 26%, and 33% of their pass attempts were out of 2 tight end sets, 2 tight end plus sets in 2024. So kind of goes both ways, right? And I think that what that tells you is that Ben Johnson can be super, super adaptable to the guys that he has. And so for me, as I look at kind of the natural progression of what they can do, I think the natural path is probably to use the 2 tight end sets early, get that strong run game off, let Caleb Williams get comfortable with more of a safety blanket offense around him. Then as he gets more comfortable, you start opening it up with those 3 wide sets. Hopefully for us Loveland investors at that point, Loveland has separated himself from Cole Kmet to where he is the 1 tight end on the field in 1 tight end sets. So that's kind of how I think it's going to go. They're gradually going to work it into being more Luther Burden on the field. And I think it's going to be a situation where Luther Burden is probably taking snaps away from Cole Kmet, being that Kmet will be on there in 2 tight end sets, but Luther Burden is going to take him off there and Loveland is going to be the 1 tight end. But I could be wrong on the Loveland thing, but that's kind of how I see it shaking out. And either way, Frank, we want pieces of this offense, and this offense is very stackable. Looking at the underdog costs here, Caleb, quarterback 9, early to mid 9th round pick. Totally fine with that. Swift, I mentioned, back of the 7th as the running back 27. DJ Moore is the wide receiver 24 right now in the mid to late 4th. Roma Dunze, early to mid 6th at wide receiver 35. So there's a part of me that would flip Rome and DJ Moore there because I think a Rome breakout is happening this season and DJ Moore might not be long for the Bears. So I could see them phasing it into Rome as the number 1 target. But I like those guys at cost regardless. I think DJ Moore is going to produce. And then Luther Burden, wide receiver 49 at the back of the 8th. Loveland is the tight end 9, early to mid 10th. And even Komet, tight end 37 in the back of the 18th. So if you need to put a 3rd tight end on your roster and it's super, super, super late and you have Caleb Williams, Cole Komet could give you a couple of touchdowns as well. So lots of options, lots to weed through. But I think I'm attacking, Frank.
Yeah, you got to love what the Bears did from coach to the offensive line to receiver. You know, Ben Johnson, obviously stud play caller. Caleb Williams now has a good offensive line. I absolutely love your call on DeAndre Swift. Huge winner after the draft. He's going as RB27, going behind Caleb Johnson, who, you know, we like as a rookie, but he's still competing for touches with Jalen Warren. You know, Swift was the lead back for the Bears last year. They didn't add anyone. Ben Johnson has some familiarity with Swift. I think he's a great value, as you mentioned. I'm a I disagree a little bit with Dunze. Like, I love the talent. I just feel like there's not enough of a discount based off what Odunze did as a rookie. Where Odunze goes, he goes actually right next
Yeah.
to Chris Olave. I would much rather have Olave just because he's shown more on the field. But Odunze goes ahead of Godwin. I'm fine with that because Godwin off the torn ACL. So some of those receivers, I'm okay with Odunze there, but I'd probably rather go with a running back because if you look at underdog at that ADP where Odunze goes, I'm just trying to pull it up here. You know, there's players like Kamara goes right next to him. Kenneth Walker. I don't know. It's priced up a little bit, but I get it.
Yeah,
There's the
yeah, totally.
potential. My take is just I don't want to pay for any of a breakout if coming off a disappointing year. I think there should be a little bit more of a discount, but obviously the talent is there. I love targeting Luther Burden later on. He goes wide receiver 49. He's risen a bit around 91 ADP, but I love the fact that they're using him in the slot and he could be a bench piece or like part of your bear stack. I feel like in redraft when it rolls around more, Burden won't be going this high. This is just because it's
No,
best ball. But I love the talent and I love that he was handpicked by Ben Johnson. Burden was, and he's already being used in the slot. But overall with this Bears offense, it's wheels up. I think the best value right now would have to be Swift.
yeah,
Caleb Williams, QB9 is like is a decent price, but it's not like a value. There's not really
mhm,
any discount. The breakout's somewhat priced in, so like he's fine. But Swift's value looks off the charts right now. I love targeting him.
totally, totally. And I will admit up front that I am going to be way higher on Roma Dunze than a lot of people, because I'm kind of taking that risk that he's going to be
Yeah,
supplanting into that wide receiver one role. So
that's
sometimes you got to risk it for the biscuit, and I'm ready to be wrong on that one. So Frank, why don't you get into your last team on teams that we want to now attach to? I like this one, so I'm interested to hear what
this
you're going
one
to have.
is not going to be so. As you can see with my theme, it's a little more contrarian. A lot of my picks for offenses to target. And the next one is the Colts. And it's the starting point for why I like the Colts is their receivers, Michael Pittman and Josh Downs. Each of those two receivers are currently drafted outside the top 50 receivers in underdog drafts. Now, I get it. Anthony Richardson really struggled as a passer, held back this passing offense. But they brought in Daniel Jones, the Colts did. Now I know what you're saying. Daniel Jones isn't good. You're you're right, but he has had Daniel Jones a couple of seasons where he was, decent. He had a QB 11 points per game finish a couple years back. The Giants won a playoff game with Daniel Jones. He could at least keep the passing game more afloat if Daniel Jones wins the starting job. And I'm making a bet that Daniel Jones will win the starting job because I feel like Shane Steichen is on the hot seat and he wants to keep his job. He needs a quarterback who gives him the best chance to win right now. Richardson, aside from his struggles, we had that rift in the locker room when, he's taking the play off. Maybe there's more behind the scenes that he's not putting enough of the work in. So I could see Jones winning that job. And if Jones wins the job, you look at Jones's supporting cast, Jonathan Taylor, home run hitting workhorse in the backfield, a better offensive line for Daniel Jones than what he had with the Giants. Shane Steichen, when he was an offensive coordinator coming up, he did great with Jalen Hurts and with Justin Herbert when Herbert was like a rookie. So he's really good with quarterbacks. So maybe Shane Steichen could help Daniel Jones take a little bit of strides as a passer. Not saying he has to be a solid starter, but we can't rule it out with good coaching and good receivers, like we said. I didn't even mention Tyler Warren, stud tight end, who the
Hmm.
Colts were ecstatic to land. Like he's a do it all type of tight end, could be great as a blocker, great underneath, and after the catch, he can really help out this offense. So suddenly, with Pittman, Downs, Warren, Taylor, that's a pretty good group of weapons, especially when you combine it with good coaching with Steichen. So Daniel Jones obviously is free in drafts. He goes at QB 34 and underdog. If you go a little bold and make Daniel Jones your QB3 in best ball and trying to make a bet that he'll win the job, and you stack him with Pittman and Downs, or Warren's already priced up. He's like tight end 10, so it's more about the receivers. So if you stack Jones with Pittman and or Downs, if Jones does win that job, obviously Jones would move up to maybe QB 31 or something, so you got a little bit of value there. But Pittman and Downs would definitely move up. They'd probably, go in the at least 10 spots higher, maybe 5. And, Pittman's coming off an awful year, but he played through an injury. And he's 1 year removed, Pittman is, from finishing as what? A top 20 wide receiver in points per
Yeah.
game. And we've seen Josh Downs make plays. A lot of people love him as a player. He's had some spike weeks. So this is just a case where you're making a leap of faith by hoping Jones takes the job, and you're trying to get value on these two talented receivers who are available outside the top 50 at their position. Hey, if we had this show last year and we were talking about the Vikings with Sam Darnold, and then I came from the future and said, hey, Darnold finished as QB 11 in points per game, led the Vikings to the 1 seed, you would have said I'm crazy.
Hmm.
So in this league, you can't rule anything out. Daniel Jones went, what, top 5 in the NFL draft? What if he gets like a renaissance with Shane Steichen? Low chance, but there is a chance, and we don't even need that for there to be value here. So the main takeaway is really Pittman and Downs outside the top 50. And, I love Jonathan Taylor as well. Second round pick that I love targeting. So this is an offense that people are not that hopeful about, reasonably so with Richardson's struggles, but I'm willing to make this take advantage of this buying opportunity that I look at.
Yeah, for sure. And I like the best ball take. I think in season long, I might be shying away a little bit more just because of the amount of guys there are. And so, like this is kind of similar to the Bears situation where there are a lot of guys, right? And I think the thing for me with the Colts versus the Bears is just not knowing who's going to be throwing them the ball and knowing that no matter who it is, they're probably going to be subpar as a passer would mean from a season long perspective, I'm probably shying away. Love what you said about the best ball stacks, though, because talking about Tyler Warren being kind of priced in as being a top tight end, I think what the value on these other guys does means that you can stomach taking Tyler Warren at
True.
cost to know that those stack options that you're going to be getting are so cheap, right? Because you can build around Tyler Warren without having to worry about any other Colts for a long time. So you can stack those guys. You can have some other elite stacks on the same roster as your Colts stacks anchoring to Tyler Warren. And I think Daniel Jones is obviously the play to go with. Anthony Richardson is looking closer to dead every single day potentially, and obviously the competition's open and he's a talented player as well, but we know that Daniel Jones, while it ain't going to be pretty, he's going to produce for fantasy when he's starting as a quarterback because he can run that ball. There will be some distribution that will happen. He did it last year. Both Malik Neighbors and Wan'Dale Robinson had over 130 targets last season. Wan'Dale was a very surprising 130 target getter for me. So I think Daniel Jones can get the ball out there. It's just a matter of whether those guys are going to catch it because I think they're well talented enough too. You didn't even mention Adonai Mitchell, who had a pretty
Yeah.
good year on low volume. He was a target earner when he was on the field last year. So um, some talent to work with. We just need the guy to distribute. I think Shane Steichen is a great offensive coordinator. Another guy you didn't mention, Frank, was probably my favorite guy of all from this offense, and that might be potentially already the best handcuff in fantasy football, DJ Giddens, who was just drafted by the Colts in the NFL draft. I thought he could have come in somewhere and been a starter if he was given the draft capital. Now seeing that he's behind Jonathan Taylor, that hurts his value. But I think from a best ball perspective, you know that he's going to be one of those super high end handcuffs. And so I'm investing in that as well. So good call on the Colts, Frank, because you're going to get him cheap and other teams are not going to be attacking. So you might even get more value on the costs that we've been throwing out here, depending on how it looks, because there's going to have to be a drastic turn for the perception of that team for fantasy gamers to be better than it is, right? I think they're going to continue to have this stink around them all through draft season, and we can capitalize on that.
Yeah. Quick thing, about the Colts with Daniel Jones. When was he at his best? Is when he had a stud running back behind him that can make big plays in Saquon Barkley. and when he had, somewhat competent pass protection, and he'll get that with the Colts with good receivers. I think, you know, he could have an okay season and really keep this offense afloat and make it, appealing in fantasy. And the way we tend to think of the Colts right now is like they're way worse than they are. Like, what did they finish? If you look, if I told you their record,
They were
like
battling for a playoff spot last year, I
like
think.
like if you told me they were 8-9 last year, I would have thought they won fewer games. Like at first thought, because they
Oh, their
weren't really.
season was a dumpster fire compared to that
Yeah,
record. Like, the
yeah,
perception was that they
exactly.
were
So
3-15 or 14 or whatever.
yeah, so it would surprise many when you, because obviously during the season you realize it, but months removed, you kind of forget that they were only 8-9. It's not like they were a complete disaster. So maybe to my point about Daniel Jones starting, if they think they're close to being, they could contend for the division with better quarterback play, they'll go with the guy like that, and I think Jones wins the job.
Yep. Giddy up. I'm going to fire off the last one. And this is actually the place where Daniel Jones, well, not exactly where he came from because he had a mini stint, maybe a cup of tea in Minnesota there, but the Giants. The Giants. And I'm not saying that this is a team that is going to blow the doors off the rest of the league offensively by any means, but I think we know that they got a Lamborghini in the chamber in one Malik Neighbors. Kind of a shout out to where they've come. Obviously, Malik Neighbors was the first piece. Tyrone Tracy was kind of the next one. And now this offseason, I think they have rounded some of that out by smashing this NFL draft. They took Abdul Carter with the number 3 overall pick and then jumped back into the first round to pick up Jackson Dart as their quarterback of the future. Huge believer in Jackson Dart right here. And I think what we're seeing in mini camps is that Brian Dable is a big fan of Brian Dart, or of Brian Jackson Dart, sorry. And looks like he is lining him up to be his quarterback of the future as well. And so all signs point to it. They came back in the 4th round and they drafted Cam Scadabo, who's a bit of a cult legend in the Western Hemisphere here. So I think that's a nice little offseason they had, especially after Joe Shane took so much heat after the offseason he had with Saquon Barkley leaving last year. Obviously, some of those conversations in the office going public didn't help him whatever by any means, but I think he's done a pretty good job. This is kind of dynasty manager 101. You trade those veteran running backs when you think the cliff might come, and you try to build off of that. And he's kind of done it, no matter what the perception of the Saquon move was in New York. Obviously, there are still a lot of questions to answer here. How long does it take for Jackson Dart to get in there? How long do we have to suffer through Russell Wilson and Jameis Winston? Although Jameis Winston, I don't think would be suffering because he's just good for all of us. But who's going to be getting the running back snaps? Tyrone Tracy had an amazing season last year with Cam Scadabo coming in, both 4th round picks, I believe. Both good pass captures, both capable runners. Is there a second wide receiver that we're going to want? Is Darius Slayton potentially would be my guy? I'm not investing those. So all of that stuff kind of remains to be seen, Frank. But I think the upswing that this offense has taken has been a good step. And that defense is going to be really good alongside of it. So those Giants are going to be frisky. So if we're looking at takeaways for the Giants, for me, number 1, Malik Neighbors is absolutely everything. He is my wide receiver 3 so far for 2025, but wide receiver 1 overall is in his range of outcomes. He's my number 7 player overall. So take him with your first round picks confidently. Number 2, I think Jackson Dart is going to get some meaningful snaps later in the season. It's going to be interesting to see whether they even go into the year with both Russell Wilson and Jameis Winston. I could see something happening there where it's only one of those guys. And so I think Jackson Dart can get in there later, to the point where if I have neighbors in best ball, I'm going to be prioritizing Jackson Dart later as the quarterback that I stack him with, as opposed to Russ or Jameis. And I don't want to have two Giants quarterbacks. So prioritizing Jackson Dart in best ball if I have Malik Neighbors, because I think it's going to come sooner, maybe rather than later. And then number 3, I think the running backs, definitely a bit of a mess, but I think there's going to be some fruit to be born out of both of those guys, because I think they're both going to suppress each other's value, Frank. I think they both do both things very well. I'm leaning towards Scadabo to work his way into 1A duties, but we're not going to find that out until after we've drafted these guys. And so I think they're going to both come at a bit of a discount because of the presence of each other. So I invite you to give all of your thoughts on the Giants, but specifically those running backs, Frank, because that's one that I'm going to have to put a little bit more work into.
Yeah, so Cam Scadabo, a lot of people love them as a prospect, and maybe that fifth round draft capital isn't as meaningful compared to other seasons because this year's running back class was so stacked. So maybe in other years, Scatabo goes maybe fourth or third. With that said, like I think Scatabo's priced a little too high. Like he's RB31 on Underdog. He's ahead of Tyrone Tracy, who's RB32. I'd rather just take a shot on Tracy in that case because at least we've seen something from Tracy in his first year. He had some solid weeks in fantasy, a couple spike weeks over 16 points. He can make an impact in the passing game. So if I'm targeting either the running backs, I'm going with the cheaper one. And in this case, we're fortunate that the cheaper one is the one who produced last year and not the rookie. So I like taking a shot there. Obviously, Malik Neighbors is a stud. I think Russell Wilson will start until, like you said, I could see Dart joining in later in the year. And I do agree that we could see them maybe cut Jameis Winston if they need that roster spot somewhere else or something like that. I don't see Winston really seeing the field unless Dart struggles. It's probably like a case where it's like Russ starting, Dart the third string, but then if Russ gets hurt, or if like they want to move on from Russ, they bring in Dart rather than
Yeah.
Winston. Um, but yeah, I could see definitely improvement. Like the defense, like you said, should be good. Abdul Turner joining that group of edge rushers, it should be pretty scary with Thibodeau and Brian Burns.
Hmm.
And remember, this team last year was terrible, but the year before was when they knocked out the Vikings. Was it, or am I
Yeah, I think
losing
so.
my? Or was that the previous year than that?
It was
No,
one of
hold
those
on.
2 they had that surprise season where it's like,
It
"Okay,
was
they're
one.
good
I
now."
don't know. Time is a blip. Okay, no, it wasn't. It was 2 years ago. Sorry,
Okay, okay.
they're 2 years removed from making the playoffs and winning around. My apologies. So they were bad the last two seasons, but they've made upgrades on defense, and obviously Neighbors is huge. So they could, not saying they're going to make the playoffs again, the Giants, but they could win 6 7 games and be competent on offense especially. So I like your call that they'll improve. you know I want to see how the backfield shakes out. We'll monitor preseason. One thing that helps Tracy is that it's not like this is a new coaching staff that
Yeah,
drafted a rookie running back. At least it's the same one that still showed trust in Tracy last year, so that helps him as well. I just don't want to pay a premium for either of these backs. So if Scatabo looks great in camp, looks great in preseason, starts to really see some steam, I'm not really going to be that interested. But
yeah,
Wandale Robinson, we didn't mention. He's not really sexy or exciting at all, but especially in full PPR, he could get those really, easy targets and then give you somewhat of a floor. If you play best ball on drafters, which is full PPR, it's that one's different where they just take your cumulative score from weeks 1 to 17 rather than making the playoffs. Having someone like Wandale Robinson who can get you those 10, 11 points here and there and can just help give you a nice little floor each week, because you don't want all your receivers in best ball to be these home run upside shots, especially on drafters full PPR. Having these boring PPR types like Wandale could be helpful.
yeah. No, I like that. And Wandale, like I said earlier, the quietest 130 target season ever last year. Guys like him and Josh Downs, like we mentioned earlier, might be great options for those types of drafts for sure. Um, Another guy that I did want to mention before we kind of move on from the Giants here, Frank, is Theo Johnson. Their tight end is a good late dart throw. One of the more athletic tight ends of all time coming into his draft year 2 seasons ago. And it looks like he's kind of got the starting job there in New York. So I think he could be a sneaky little tight end option as a safety element for the quarterback. Um, yeah, just kind of a late round flyer, not somebody you're picking up in season long, but late round best ball as that third tight end if you need it on that team. Fly at her. Okay, Frank. So that's the teams that we've got on here. We flew through 6 teams there. I think we gave a pretty good wrap on what we think is going to happen there and the people in each team that we want to attach to. Some big takeaways, some things to monitor. I think we got a tidy little episode under our belts here, my man. So yeah, make sure people, if you're listening to this, subscribe to that YouTube channel. That is the meat and potatoes. Of course, we're on the audio platforms as well, so go check us out there. We'd love to see some more audio listens there as well, so please check it out. Follow on there and leave a review. Leave a comment on the YouTube and like the video. We're going to be putting them out weekly and lots of content to be had. So just starting the True North journey with me and Frank, and it's going to be a lot of fun. Of course, the Substack, tnff.substack.com, is where you can find any of our written work. I'm going to be plugging away at some more of these target breakdowns. This episode kind of made me do some of my Chicago Bears target breakdown, so maybe that's the next one that's going to be on the docket. So subscribe to that Substack because there's some really good content coming out there, Frank. So any parting shots for the people before I take us out, brother?
Parting shots, you could check my content also at Rotoballer, Fantasy Pros, and a number of other sites on my Twitter bio. I'm always putting out content like that. Like you said, check out our Substack. We're going to put my rankings there, all kinds of things. Should be exciting, and try to dabble. If you're hardcore into fantasy football, dabble a little bit in early best ball drafts because it's a great time to find some value. And then honestly, it feels awesome when you hit that early value. Like let's say you got RJ Harvey in 8th round. Like that's always fun when you pick a player before
Yeah.
the steam hits. So you don't want to go overboard, obviously, but sprinkle in a few drafts if you plan on being, a high volume best ball guy or best ball
Mm-hmm.
girl.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
you can really I feel when I'm in best ball early, I have such a better feel for player values throughout the offseason. Like you can see where guys are being steamed up, and these markets are a lot sharper than some of the other markets we play in our home leagues, right? So these are the people who are doing it to a hardcore level, and you know that it's pretty accurate information as far as these player values there. So yeah, good call. We're gonna be doing a bunch of that stuff over on the Substack, and you might see some best ball drafts here on the YouTube channel. So for the Italian Stallion, Frank Amaranti, I am Travis Seal. We will see you next week. Peace.